Hi everyone. Today I'm going to be talking about nuclear energy. My main claim is that nuclear energy is the most practical form of energy generation. Nuclear energy, along with other low emission renewable energy sources like solar, wind, geothermal, and tidal power, is becoming more widespread as global warming becomes an issue. The U.S. Department of Energy reports that almost 20% of the United States' power comes from nuclear energy. I believe nuclear energy is superior to other sources because it has more applications than just producing power commercially. Nuclear energy is more practical than other renewable energy sources because it can be used anywhere, it produces some useful byproducts, and is the cheapest source of power on a large scale. My first claim is that nuclear reactors can be used anywhere. Because they don't depend on the sun or wind to function, they can be used in areas such as in space, underwater, on ships that don't have to refuel for long periods of time, and underground. For example, the U.S. Navy uses nuclear reactors to power some of their ships. The World Nuclear Association states that the U.S. Navy has accumulated over 6,200 reactor years of accident-free experience over the course of 240 million kilometers without a single incident over a period of more than 50 years. The same source states that no nuclear-related deaths have occurred in the United States since we started using nuclear power. In outer space, solar may not always be available when far enough from the near stars and there's no wind. This leads into my next point, that nuclear reactors produce some useful byproducts. The byproducts of certain fuels in nuclear reactors have uses in space travel, medicine, and agriculture. While using uranium as a fuel for a nuclear reactor produces some waste, it also produces plutonium, a radioactive isotope used to power spacecraft. Using thorium in nuclear reactors also produces the same fuel, while creating little to no radioactive waste. Many byproducts in the thorium fuel process can be recycled and used as fuel to renew the process. The radiation can be captured as heat and used in power for generators called RTGs. The fuel can also be produced in nuclear reactors that are used for commercial energy generation. In an article from NASA, it's detailed that the RTG on board the Curiosity rover on Mars not only powers the rover, but also provides heat to keep it within operating temperatures. Though communities on Earth don't have access to the large amount of fuel that RTGs may use, that they would need, other types of reactors can be used, leading to my next point. Nuclear power is the cheapest on a large scale. The cost of one nuclear power plant is in the range of $1 to $2 billion. However, one nuclear power plant is able to produce the same amount of energy that a massive amount of wind turbines or solar panels are able to produce. Nuclear reactors also have about a 90% uptime. In an article from The Hill written by a U.S. Senator, it is described that other renewable energy sources seem cheap only because they're subsidized with billions in taxpayer dollars and government money because they have not yet been built to scale. At current rates, taxpayers would have to shell out $170 billion to subsidize the 186,000 wind turbines necessary to equal the output of 100 reactors. Only at a large scale, nuclear power becomes more economical for communities. In conclusion, nuclear power is one of the more practical technologies we have today to generate power, among other things. Nuclear reactors can be built anywhere as long as they are contained. The byproducts from nuclear energy have many applications. Nuclear power can be cheaper than other sources, and we should make use of the abundant energy that nuclear reactors can provide. Thank you.
All right, the proposition's clear. There's a good preview of what the supporting structure is going to be. You could do a little bit more to talk about the controversy on the issue. Why is it that nuclear power has to be advocated in contrast to all these other things if it's got the benefits that you're talking about? I think there is an assumption about risk and environmental impacts that maybe puts nuclear power behind the eight ball, so to speak, but you don't really raise those as issues. You kind of treat them as if they don't exist. And if it's a matter of choosing between something that is as inexpensive as you suggest with no problems, then why would we not be picking that over all these other things that are inconsistent? There are reasons, and I think you're kind of missing the old saying, the elephant in the room. There are some of those points that probably need to be addressed a little bit more. That's what makes nuclear power controversial in the first place. The first point talks about the ability to produce energy, and I think that that's fine. You've got good examples in contrast to wind and solar and potential other sources of energy. There's a limited amount of information here. You've got some statistical information that says we get X amount of electricity from nuclear power now. That it's up, it's got uptime 90%. You do a comparison at one point to the number, but that's a cost issue that you get to later on to the other kinds of energy resources. I think it's okay, but it's not overwhelming, the proof on that. So you've got a solid argument here. The second argument about the byproducts seems to be dependent on more than anything else, space travel. There's not really much reference to medical uses. You're talking about plutonium and thorium being used to fuel vehicles outside of Earth's atmosphere. That might seem relevant and important, but there's not really a huge demand for that at the moment, so I'm not sure that that's really a good selling point. Long-term uses, I think, could probably be developed for some of these other points. You mentioned some other possible uses, but you don't really develop them, so it really feels thin in this particular section. The cost issue, I think, is the main barrier for a lot of people on this. Now, you've got an estimate of $1 to $2 billion to create a nuclear power plant that would be sufficient to provide as much energy as you mentioned a whole bunch of wind turbines would. I don't know where that cost estimate comes from. I think that you need to provide that because I've heard substantially higher cost estimates for a single plant. And when you make a comparison later on, you say, we'd have to spend $170 billion to get as many wind turbines as would be necessary to provide as much energy for 100 nuclear power plants. Well, let's suppose that your estimate is correct, that it's $2 billion for each nuclear power plant. Well, that's $200 billion, which is more than the $170 billion that you're talking about here. So I'm not exactly sure that you've got the right selling point on this. The better argument seems to be, like the viability or the downtime on that particular point. There is a good argument here that suggests that the other energy resources seem cheap in comparison because they're heavily subsidized, and I think that's one of the things that also is maybe a selling point for nuclear power, but it needs to be explained a little bit more. All right, I'm going to stop there. Thank you.